bench press can
Yes.
cause a problem for AC joint. Why specifically is that? And then I'm going to counter your point.
What I listed before is based just from the research, right? It's not from me prodding into the idea or anything, but I know you can have, like I said, a degeneration of the AC joint, and it's a test. I think these studies are done to compare operative versus non-operative treatments. What they find is that they both go away pain-free, but there has been some support for surgical intervention based on this idea that some non-operative cases couldn't restore their bench press strength. And it's like, this is a little bit of, neurogenic inhibition or pain, the brain kind of the awareness of a joint that either is not stable enough or not copacetic in a way that lets you press as much as you possibly could press.
Right.
And then the other idea maybe is if that joint is changed or modified from healthy, it may not support as much pressing. But I think this intense adduction, it's a bit of an adduction, especially depends on how, if they're arching their back a ton or where they're getting this press power from. But and even though it looks like it's just protraction, but protraction is compression at the AC joint. So, and it's not like if you bench press once a week or something and you bench press 135 pounds, like don't worry about your AC joint. It's going to be fine. I'm talking more about high volume pressing and heavy loads.
Yeah, I agree. The majority of people are probably going to be fine benching. But let's just break down, just because who doesn't like talking about bench pressing and or bench press Mondays? This is for all you bench press Mondays. One of the problems, mechanically speaking, with bench press is that especially if your arms are going to go behind you, where Bobby was talking earlier about the horizontal abduction passively that we're doing. You see it more today where people are doing the floor bench presses where their arms can't really go behind them, and that's fine too, whatever. I'm talking about your traditional bench press. Even if it's not a competition, your arms must go behind you, especially if you're doing some single arm like flies sort of thing, right? To do that, you are putting your pec muscle into an eccentrically positioned place and then asking for a concentric torque on it. So this kind of goes back to, Bobby does this really well, matching things up. If your arm is abducted behind the midline, you also need a good deal of external rotation to do so. If you haven't done that, that should matching up with putting your pec into an eccentric place. But usually you've started loading your pec up when you pick up the weights concentrically. And then you go way back into this eccentric position and you're going to put a ton of strain through that pec, which is great for hypertrophy. It's fantastic. If you've got good form, you can pin yourself down. But it will put some strain on that AC joint if you begin to load and load. If you do not also have a good compressive strategy on the back of your torso. So in other words, if your arm is going to go behind you, you need support under your shoulder blade. Some people call it dorsal rostral expansion. Some people call it posterior mediastinal. You need basically air under your back to allow your pec, your humerus to be abducted, externally rotated beyond your midline to put that pec in an eccentric place. You got pressure behind your shoulder blade, then you could bench press out of that. It's a long way to say that it's a little bit more complicated, but a lot of people will keep their pec concentrically positioned and then ask it to do an eccentrically loaded thing. Now we got problems. Those don't match up. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, it's fair too. And I would say a lot of it in the competitive bench pressing or people that are just trying to bench like those guys, there's technique to this. And part of it is so you can press more weight, but part of it is so you can press more like frequency, volume without tearing your shoulders to pieces. And these lifters know this, whether they know a single anatomical structure in the body. These guys just know how to do it. And one of them, I don't know why we're so far down the bench press rabbit hole personally, but as you're coming down with the bar, those guys know how to load the lats, for example. They know how to keep the triceps on and the lats on in a way. That's why a lot of the guys will start to bring their elbows very tight or at least somewhat tight. And you'll see a lot of beginner bench pressers bench press at this 90 degrees of shoulder abduction position. So the elbows are out like just perpendicular to your body going straight down. And that is a ton of stress on the shoulders. For one, you're going to be terrible at bench pressing. And for two, you're not going to last very long. It's a lot of stress on the anterior elements, eccentrically. Like you said, those elbows have to go down below the bench. If your shoulders can't handle that, that's going to cause issues. And because if you can't handle it, let's say you have no shoulder extension, well, then your scapula is going to start to move with it. And when your scapula moves, you're compressing stuff, you're torquing stuff. Yeah, biceps, tendons, all sorts of stuff are kind of fair game to get messed up. I mean, I've had a few conversations in clinic this week just about this, being careful to ramp up volume slowly over time, to be aware of things that seem minor at the time. Like, oh, every time after I bench press, I just have this very, very, very sketchy pec for 2-3 days, always on my left side. I'm like, okay, that's quite serious. You should take that very seriously. And, for one, just ease into volume to let these tissues adapt to it. AC joints can probably tolerate 500-pound bench presses, but not if you go 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, but over time you can earn the right to do these things.
I fully agree. It's great if you want to add stress. You're totally right, but load it appropriately. I mean, that's the people that come into your office. That's when I hear they're like, I was feeling good. I was just going to do one more set. I was feeling good. I think I could do 2 more reps. And my buddy was yelling at me. So I did those last 2 reps. And then that's when you're in one of our offices.
Pop the pec off there.
Boom.
Yeah.
But no, I think the point to kind of translate from the bench press to kind of the traditional rehab is the specificity that lacks in some of the research that you were kind of finding, and some of the specificity that I know you and I appreciate in rehab is that oftentimes you're just doing kind of general exercises, and honestly, depending on your deconditioned or super hyper conditioned population, depending the specificity of your outcome, the generalization or specificity of your exercise will meet that, right? If you just kind of want to get your blood flowing a little bit, then go grab your bands and do some I's, Y's, and T's, and don't put much strain into it. You don't have to go all the way to the end range. And if I gave my grandma I's, Y's, and T's, she would be better for it. She's in her 80s, just getting her arms to take a little bit of load and stress, nothing crazy. That's awesome. Now, if you are listening to this podcast, you obviously kind of probably care deeply about your rehab and rehabilitating people. So this is where we start to talk about the orientation of muscles in relation to the bones, like the humerus being and the pec being in an eccentrically positioned place when you're asking for concentric action from it. And this is where we provide extra strain and torque. So like that's part of the problem, I think. And again, last episode, I kind of want to hear a little bit more about it, but why EMG studies are not great for predicting good rehab, right? And it goes right back to this thing where I was talking about concentric and eccentric. EMG studies pick up concentric action very well, but not eccentrically. And in terms of the shoulder, you need a lot of eccentric load. You need to make sure that you are taking consider eccentric load. So for instance, this is one of the things, a lot of people's pecs, we'll just stick with bench press because that's the thing of the day apparently. A lot of people's pecs are concentrically loaded perpetually. What are some of the strategies we can do to eccentrically start loading the pecs? Some of these big superficial muscles like the traps, the delts, the lats, how can we eccentrically start to load them? A couple quick ones that I like to give to people if you can. It's summertime, go swim. If you just are kind of swimming through the water and breathing normally, you can begin to start to eccentrically load what are previously concentric muscles. It's one of the benefits. You'll see kind of swimmers, they got these soft bodies somehow. They can be, the Ryan Lochte's are, they're clearly athletes, but somehow their muscles just look chill. You know what I mean? They've learned how to eccentrically load some of these very superficial muscles that we've now used these superficial muscles to help us breathe. One of my favorite strategies is kettlebell walks, farmer's carries, suitcase carries. Those are some of the great ways to eccentrically load. But I think that's kind of where it was going in terms of the classic exercises, like the Codman's kind of hanging arm. That's the idea that they're going for. But if you could understand the principles behind why we would do a Codman's hanging arm kind of circumduction circles, that's to eccentrically load muscles that have been concentrically loaded. So the more specifically you can kind of name those things, the better specificity you get from your rehab.